if you want to get us going.
Okay. Thank you, Jordan. Hello, this is Fred Iantorno, and welcome to TechTalk360, sponsored by AirPro Diagnostics. I would like to thank Lonnie Margle, Michael Quinn, and Team AirPro for making this possible. TechTalk360's mission is to provide a learning environment around emerging technologies that will enhance consumer safety, workplace professionalism, and provide value to all industry segments. We will present the hot topics in the industry and the issues you need to be aware of. Our goal is to present topics that you won't normally see in other webinars. TechTalk360 webinars are presented approximately every other month. The next webinar will be held January 31st. I would like now to turn over things to our two great hosts, Jordan Hendler and George Avery.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Jordan.
Morning or good afternoon, George.
Have you recovered from CIC and SEMA?
Not quite, but I'm working on it. I got my gear on and
going on my third set of insoles for my shoes, and I still haven't found one to work. Anyway, good one. Thank you, Fred. We got a great one today. This is a good one on refinish. This is awesome. So Jordan, any other comments? Otherwise, I'll roll right into a little bit of housekeeping and we can get going, because I think we're going to have some questions.
And I think just for the new audience, George, why don't you give a little bit about yourself?
All right, George Avery's here. That's a good question. I'm with myself every day, so it didn't seem like a big deal, right? Anyway, I've been in the industry for quite a long time, and worked for a major insurance company and came out of the body shop, started as a painter's helper. Anyway, but things have changed since I was spraying. But anyway, I've been in the industry, a past chair of a CIC, a past chair of the National Auto Body Council, and I'm really blessed and appreciate the opportunity to be a host on TechTalk360, which I think is going in the right direction. And having Jordan as a co-host is a big plus. So Jordan, I'll leave it to you, and then I'll head into the antitrust.
Yeah, absolutely. And also really grateful to be here with everybody. I'm really excited about the topic today. Feel very passionate about it. I have been in the industry my entire life. I'm actually second generation within like collision industry conferences. George mentioned, I'm the organizer. I also administrate for several trade associations within our industry. So I love the perspective that I get to have. I love what I do. And this is just one cherry on top that I love to be able to have these conversations for the leading edge of the industry. And I'm excited to be the repairer perspective today. So my questions would come from, my experience with the shops that I work with, both locally and nationally. So I'll let you get into the antitrust, George, and I will be your question moderator for the day, I think.
All right. Well, that sounds good. And then, of course, I cover the insurance side, or at least try to carry the flag for the insurance. And to have Jordan there to bounce things off is really a real benefit. Well, let's get into the antitrust. That does have to be read out loud. So let's make sure we get that done. As participants of this webinar, we need to be mindful of constraints of antitrust laws. There shall be no discussion of agreements or concerted actions that may restrain competition. Now, this prohibition includes the exchange of information concerning individual prices, rates, coverages, market practices, claim settlement practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. Each participant is obligated to speak up immediately for the purpose of preventing any discussion falling outside these bounds. So what'll happen is, Jordan and I will keep our ear to what's being said, and certainly will speak up, but it's at the same time, you have a responsibility, which you can do through the Q&A feature. So speaking of the Q&A feature, Jordan, if you could just give them a quick update about submitting questions through Q&A and how we disabled the chat feature.
Actually, so the chat feature, I believe, is enabled, but that would just be for people to say hi, talk to each other, make comments. But if you have a question specifically on the topic or for the speakers, use that Q&A function that is on your screen today. I do see chat on my end, but maybe not. So the questions will come to us. We will find the right place to ask the question. If it's really relevant to what the speaker is saying right then we will bring it up. Otherwise, we will hold the questions for the end. George and I will also have our own questions that were submitted in advance. So we will try to use those questions as some of our fodder if the attendees don't seem to get to it. So we've had the luxury of being able to get these slides in advance, talk about it in advance, but they're seeing it for the first time. So I think that's where we're at.
All right, so we're going to get started real quick. I just want to make a comment though, real quick. And the vehicle manufacturers have been increasing, ADAS. You've got radar, ultrasound cameras, LiDAR, all that stuff. In fact, I think you could advance this slide. I had one on there that had that. But my whole point is that as everybody gets a little bit, cranky about the fact that all these devices are sitting behind bumpers and sitting behind quarter panels and so on, you got to realize that they're there for a reason. So if they got to go somewhere, those sensors, if society and the manufacturers, want to have the safety that we're looking for on the road, they got to go somewhere. And if you don't want to hide them, and I know it's frustrating to hide them, but if you just advance the slide, your car could look like this, which I just advance that for me real quick if it's advancing. Now, these are part of these are autonomous vehicles, so I'm not trying to make a comparison to a drivable car. But my point is, those sensors have to go somewhere. So I think what's a real benefit about this call in particular is that Refinish has a lot of impact over where those sensors are, what those sensors look through. So just a point, they got to go somewhere. So any frustration we have, we need to get used to it because that's the future. So with that, we've got two speakers today. Jeff Wildman's here from BASF. I've known Jeff. Yes.
Before we go to Jeff and Daniel, I do want to add one collective consumer input on this, what we're seeing on our screen right now. So one of the things that came out of a conversation I just had this morning, even with several shops, definitely thought leaders in the marketplace, was let us never forget that we may have learned to drive without the assistance of these features on vehicles, right? We learned how to drive without lane departure, park assist, forward collision warning. We did not have any of those features when we learned how to drive. But every new driver today, if they're in a vehicle equipped with these systems, will now be wholly dependent on them. And their driving habits will become dependent. I know I'm dependent on my lane departure warning. And I drive like, well, I don't want to tell you all how I drive. But let's just say I am dependent also now on these systems, and that occurs to me all the time. So let us never forget the consumer, our customer, and their safety when it comes to these discussions.
Yeah, it's a whole new, some people haven't for years, they haven't turned their head, right? You don't need to, you got a screen and so on. But once those things, it makes me think about when you go to the grocery store, it used to be you counted change back. Now, if you want to work, it tells you what change to give back, which is great, as long as it works. So it's having this kind of detail is really good. All right. So with that, let's get Jeff and Daniel introduced. First, I'll introduce Jeff Wildman. Jeff has been around for a long time. I've known him for years. He's the expert in automotive aftermarket for aftermarket industry at BASF. And from BASF, a company that's focused on safety. And Jeff has been around the country talking a variety of different locations about this. If you haven't seen his bio, look it up. It's really good. Daniel's here. This is where I think is the greatest part. You've got BASF, and then you have someone, and not that Jeff doesn't know that, he has his feet on the ground as well. But it's nice to have, closer to a technician and what Daniel brings to the table. Of course, he's a business manager for Zimmerman Auto Body Supplies, but he's also involved in some other broadcast as far as refinishing through Collision Hub and does a great job there. So having that combination is really good. So make sure that you check out his bio as well. So with that, Jordan, anything else we missed? Otherwise, I'll let Jeff. We'll start with Jeff probably. And get started and look forward to it. And again, I'll remind everyone, as Jordan said, we're kind of, if your questions come in through Q&A, if it's interruptible, it's a question that seems like we should ask right now, Jordan and I will do that. Otherwise, we'll wait to the end. So with that, Jeff, I appreciate you being here.
Hey, thanks, George, and thanks, Jordan. And thanks for having me here today. I appreciate it. And what I'm going to talk about is again, kind of like George said, a little bit on the higher level, but what's going on with refinish and ADAS and radar, and how paint's really becoming more than just a cosmetic piece of that repair today. So if you want to go to the next slide. Next slide. Just to talk about this, when we talk about vehicles today, I mean, if you look at vehicles manufactured, over 90% of them have some type of ADAS on them today. And when you're looking at the vehicles on the road, the registered vehicles, over half, and it's closer to 60% actually this year, of those vehicles on the road have ADAS. So the vehicles that you're seeing in the shops today, more than likely have some type of ADAS system on them. Now, they're all built for safety, and how do we try and make these vehicles safer? And of course, they're there to reduce fatalities. But we also know that roughly 84% of people turn off those features because, and this is from CCC, because they're annoying. And I've driven with lane assist, and in some cars it's not bad, but in some cars it's really annoying. And I've also had rental cars where they just start beeping or a bell ringing and you don't know what it is. And that happens when people have these new cars too. So they are turning them off in some cases, but we're not seeing the decrease in accidents like we thought we would. So that's why you're seeing these vehicles. And again, most of these vehicles that you're seeing today are coming in with some type of ADAS feature, whether it be the automatic braking or forward alert or adaptive cruise or lane departure. Those are things that we need to be aware of. And if we go to the next slide, some of these, like George mentioned, they're hidden. The automotive designers don't want to see these radar units or these LiDAR units or all this technology on the outside of the vehicle. So where can they put it that it'll work, but it doesn't hurt the way the vehicle looks? And that's where you look at these images here. A lot of them are behind the grills or emblems or bumpers, things like that. And where we really look at it from a refinish perspective is when they're behind a painted fascia or behind a painted portion of the vehicle. So if we go to the next slide, when we talk about radar, and this is where we start to get into a little bit of the science, you start to think about where this radar is. And if it's behind a bumper, that radar signal is transmitting out and it's got to hit something and bounce back. Well, anything that's between the radar unit and whatever that is behind the vehicle is going to interfere with that transmission signal to some extent. And that's really what we're trying to measure here. And that's where refinish coatings really come in, and the coatings on the vehicle is how much of that radar signal is either absorbed or reflected on the way out to that item or whatever it is behind the vehicle, and then how much of it gets absorbed and reflected on the way back. So we need to measure that signal strength. And if the signal strength isn't there, then that radar unit's not going to do what it was designed to do. It's not going to let you know that there's a car behind you or there's a child behind you or what's happening behind your vehicle. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that we start to talk about is how the color impacts that. And you've probably all seen some of these documents that just came up. Every OEM has repair procedures or position statements that talk about how radar permittivity is impacted by the color or the coatings that go on these vehicles. And when you start to look at the repair process, it's not the same as we've always done in the past, where you wait until that car gets in the booth, then you look up the color and you say, okay, we're just painting a bumper. This has got to be part of that repair planning process now. When you're doing the blueprinting, you should be looking up that color code early on, because if we look at the next slide, some of the times what you're going to find is there's going to be a radar variant or a radar compatible color that's going to come up. And this will show up regardless of what paint manufacturer you're working with. They're going to have different variations that may be radar compliant, because if you apply the standard based on the pigments or the metallics or the thickness of the material, that radar may not work properly. So it's really important that you start thinking about this early in that repair process and finding out, is there a radar standard? And if so, what's the radar standard look like? Is it going to be as good of a match as the standard color? I don't know. That's one of those things that's a question you've got to answer. But that's why we want to look at this early on. If we go, and when we talk about radar, if we go to the next slide, what we're really talking about in repairing these bumpers is that radar transmission area. So again, it's really important for you to understand where the radar is in that vehicle. And again, a lot of times they're right there on kind of the edge of the bumper, or potentially on the corner where it melts into the quarter panel. And what's the transmission area? Because when we talk about radar and we talk about repairing a bumper, it's just critical that you know what area we're talking about. The other thing that you need to really understand is there is no blending allowed in that radar transmission area. If you need to blend it on a bumper in the middle of the bumper between where the radar units are, again, go back to that repair procedure from the OEM, and they'll tell you how far away from the radar you need to be. But there is no blending over that radar unit, which means in some cases, you may need to blend into the quarter panel, because a lot of those radar units are so far over on the edge, they're right at the end of that bumper where it meets up with the quarter panel. So again, it's really important to start thinking about this much earlier in the repair process. If you go to the next slide, regardless of who you're working with, what paint company, every one of the paint companies has some type of information about radar and sensors to talk about paint. Because when you talk to an OEM, they will tell you whether a bumper can be repaired or refinished or not, but they will tell you to refer to the paint manufacturer's recommendations for how to paint that bumper or how to apply the paint to the bumper. And that's where your paint manufacturer's TDS sheets really come in, and they become that OEM repair procedure for how to apply the proper material, the proper amount of material. These documents like the radar and sensor unit that we've got here and that all the other paint companies have will also tell you things like, don't blend over the radar sensors. They'll talk about using the radar variants. And when we talk about a radar variant, if you find one that doesn't match perfect, you cannot tint that. Because we've gone and we've taken this, we've measured it and worked with the OEMs to ensure that these radar units will operate properly after they've been repaired with these radar variants. So there's a lot of little pieces like that, a lot of details that it's really important to understand. And these documents from your paint manufacturer will really help you understand that and work with your painters and the rest of your repair team to make sure that these cars are repaired properly and put back on the road safely. So all of this safety technology is operating the way it was meant to. So I think that was my last slide. We'll turn things over to back over to Jordan or Daniel here.
Well, real quick, as we make this break in between, I just had a quick question, Jeff, and it's
Sure.
kind of maybe out of your wheelhouse a little bit, if that's possible. So you say you work with the OEMs and you go through the process of working with them, which is great. I know you supply paint, you do all that, which is wonderful. So my question is that the OEMs have a lot going on, but there's been some situations we've all, sectioning frame rails and so on that used to be, you had to replace the whole frame and then they make a section. So they always make some updates and changes. And I've always applauded the OEMs for making those adjustments, because in their mind, they're already 5 years down the road working on the next car. And here we are going, hey, the car you made 2 years ago, I got a question, the problem with that. It's like, man. So my point is that when bumper sensors first came out, you saw the little bullet eyes, on the back of the bumper.
Mm-hmm.
When I first saw that, I thought that was a little disturbing. It doesn't look, I didn't think it looked that good, and you had a smooth fascia and everything was nice. And now you got these buttons, but I don't think twice about them now. My question is, it seems like all this is on the refinish shoulders to make a paint that the radar can see through. Have you ever had any conversation with the OE about having a replaceable panel? And I don't mean a clear panel. I just mean a portion of the bumper that's in front of the radar can be removed and replaced and then if there's any color deviation or any problems, it's really, you know, associated with a
Yeah.
smaller spot. I don't know if I made sense, but does that come up at all?
Yeah, we actually have asked that question.
Good.
And I've asked it of a couple of OEMs. I've also asked it, you know, of our division that supplies paint to the OEMs at the factories. And everybody's kind of come back with, hey, you know, that's not a bad idea. But we've never really talked about it, or nobody's brought it up. It hasn't gone anywhere. So nobody has an answer to it yet. But I have asked that question because I've had others ask me that question before. But like I said, from the OEM perspective, it's always been, yeah, you know, that's a good idea. We've not really thought about it.
Well,
Whether they
that's
have or not, I'm not sure.
You know, and that same attitude, and which is not negative, is exactly how frame rails and all that other things happen. Yeah, we've had a lot of people say that. We haven't had a chance to look at it. So I would just encourage insurers and repairers to make sure that, you know, if you see a solution that would be a lot better, because you see these cars every day, just get that to the OE. I have a lot of respect for the OEs, and I know they got a lot on their plate, but it could be something in the future very similar to changing a repair procedure to make it easier. So anyway, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate the comments.
Daniel, I think you're on deck, sir, and I'm holding all of my questions to the end because I know what you're about to do. So I'll give you the floor, and we'll all go back into the background and let you take over, and then we'll have your questions for the end.
All right, Jordan, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And Jeff, awesome. That, you know, a lot of the things that you had said, you know, in your couple slides there, I couldn't agree with more. And I know that you had written an article relatively recently, and I think you really hit the nail on the head where you specifically had stated there's no such thing as a small bumper cover repair anymore. And what's so fascinating is what George had just alluded to, where a couple years back, we knew in the refinish department, if we have the biggest radar issue we had was making sure the sensors were popped out before we painted the bumper cover. You know, and the times have changed dramatically when it comes to radar, specifically in refinish. And the old rule of thumb was, well, paint never killed anybody, and you know, only bad repairs did, and they were structural repairs, not following your procedure. But we're in a position now where that's no longer true, and paint absolutely will impact and is impacting the safety of an automobile. So Jordan, if you could go to the first slide there. So this is just kind of a recap there with Jeff, and this is off of you know, one of the OEM sites. You have Mercedes-Benz here, and they're specifically stating in these blueprints what this looks like. So you have some that may be visible and some that may not be visible, and this is why it is so important that the refinish technicians are working alongside your estimators, your blueprinters, your repair planners, because when they get that bumper cover, they may or may not know where these locations are. So these types of OEM procedures have to be reviewed with the paint department. Jordan, next slide, please. And give that another click. Another click. Okay, so once again, we get back on this breakdown, and I love the way Mercedes-Benz does it, because they're literally giving you very specific metrics on which to follow. And what we had talked about, I think Jeff talked about it at his class at SEMA, and I know that we did, was really truly understanding that these schematics are important. There's no way to guess your way through this, because there's no visual indicator for you to determine just by looking at a bumper cover what may or may not be affected by a potential radar, non-radar formula. So we're going to get a little bit deeper into what that looks like. Jordan, next slide, please. So this is an incredibly important tool. I think it was talked about with Ford a couple of years back. It kind of died a little bit, and I know GM had gotten on it with the CT6, but this is making a sensational comeback solely based on bumper covers. Jordan, next slide, please. So this is directly out of Volkswagen, and like I had said in the beginning, This is why it is so important that refinish technicians are 100% involved in the repair planning stage of vehicles. So if we just look at what Volkswagen is specifically stating, this is some pretty powerful stuff. So the layer of paint before the sensors must not exceed 150 microns. Just a side note, if you're not sure how to convert that, if you have microns that you want to convert to mils, which is what kind of the world we live in, you just take microns divided by 25.4, and that will give you what the mil spec is supposed to be. So if I look right here at number 4, this is what's really important. And like I had said back to the article Jeff had written, this is exactly why. So 3-coat painting of bumper cover is not permitted. Before starting to paint, check if the bumper has already been subsequently painted by producing a sanding pattern in the surrounding area. Now, the better way to do that is to take your DeFelsco and do your measurement. The measuring is incredibly important because you may get a bumper cover in that, okay, if the customer requires, it looks like a scratch repair. Happens to be a Volkswagen that must be abide by this OEM procedure. And I do a film measurement on it with the DeFelsco, and I come up showing, hey, this thing's already been repainted 2 times after the OEM finished. I don't even have the ability to paint this bumper cover because it's not going to pass ADAS when it's done. So this is why we have to be thinking, like Jeff had said before, in the repair planning stage, we got to be way ahead of this. So if we know the refinish rules going in as per Volkswagen, we're able to document this up front and say we can or cannot repair this bumper cover. Next slide, please. So here's one of my favorite DAG inquiries, and those of you that are on the call that aren't familiar with the DAG web, it's something I promote a lot with all my clientele. It's an incredibly valuable tool. So the way the DEG works is you're a body shop, you're an estimator, you're a technician, and you may have a question about a process or a procedure that you think is not being correctly compensated for within one of the IPs. The IP is going to be the information provider, meaning CCC, Mitchell, Auditech, so on and so forth. So this is a great example of a resolution to this particular question. And the question is, does Motors estimated refinish time for a database vehicle, regardless of year, make, or model, include labor time to gauge and measure the existing paint film? Incredibly important. So if we look here at the blue arrow, measuring mil thickness of paint is not included in the estimated work time. The cost of materials for any ultrasonic coupling gels would not be included. Labor time, cost of materials to measure, manufacture, radial template is not included. So those are 3 separate operations that would have to be done in your refinish department that if you were not familiar with the way this IP change works, the resolution works, you would not know to look here. So Jordan, next slide, please. So there's the resolution. So you have the estimate release date is closed. Resolution motor stated after review of the concern, the following has been found, and they're indicating as per inquiry number 19625. This is it. Okay, Jordan, next slide, please. So I love this, and this goes back to this safety issue. So here's an example of how a shop wrote an estimate specifically stating how they measure it. Now, I want to get a little bit more detail on this DeFelsco Positector 200. So this tool is essentially an ultrasound machine. Before we have the ability to measure plastics via ultrasound, it would have to be done with a destructive type of test that was very complicated and the accuracy was questionable. So when you're running a DeFelsco Positector 200 specifically, which is designed for the automotive aftermarket, there's 2 models. You have a B1 and you have a B3. The B1 model is going to be considered a standard or a simple model, and the B3 is going to be considered advanced. If you're a repair technician or an estimator or you own a shop, I personally recommend the B3 because the B3 will allow you to store 100,000 measurements, and it's also going to allow you to download those measurements into your computer, and you also have the ability to print to one of their own Bluetooth speakers and one of their Bluetooth printers. The reason that I find that tool to be valuable is DeFelsco will specifically state you can't measure just in one spot. So if we have a bumper cover that's kind of on that verge of, could we repair this? You have to take 5 or 6 measurements in roughly a 6x6 area, 6 inch by 6 inch in the repair zone, and then come up with an average. So this takes time. This takes the couplant gel. So it's something you want to keep in mind, and documentation is the key for both the safety of the customer and as well as, for the consumer education portion. Jordan, next slide, please. So once again, here's from Toyota TIS. They're specifically talking about technicians performing a self-diagnostic function following bumper repairs using a check reflection power. So if you think about what Jeff had said earlier, talking about reflection power, this is incredibly important. And once again, this is where your finish department is now getting involved alongside your repair planners and your blueprinters, because they have to be aware of what this is potentially going to be the impact on them. So it may change the tip size of gun they use. It may change the old, I can put a second coat of sealer on. A lot of the things that we used to do out of habit, those habits have to be broken. And this comes down to it. So if I'm a technician and I say, well, it's raw plastic, sometimes I do 2 coats of sealer, that way it gives me a little bit more bite. I'm able to denib it. I get a better finish. You may have to revamp your procedure, because if that extra coat of sealer winds up becoming the max mill threshold beyond it, and now the car can't pass ADAS, you have an $800 or $1,000 bumper cover that's no longer valuable. Next, Jordan. Next, please. Next again. Okay, perfect. So this is another very, very important thing, and Jeff had mentioned it earlier, that all the paint manufacturers understand that this is a real thing. And the biggest piece of advice I can give for anybody is, if you're not in, whether it be a cloud or, some kind of online formula retrieval, that's really where you need to be, because that's where the updates are happening the most rapidly. So if you're on an older style system with your paint manufacturer, and it's literally software that's downloaded on your computer, you're really going to get that ramped up. And I like kind of what they said here. If radar is equipped, ensure the vehicle owner is aware of the 2 available formulas. And I couldn't agree with that more, because you're going to have a scenario where maybe a BMW comes in, it's getting a rear bumper cover and a decklet, and you're blending the quarter panels, and you get hit with a radar compliance option, and you find out, yes, indeed, I do have to use radar compliance formula. I don't have the ability to adjust that color. So I may be able to do a spectro match to do the sheet metal, but when it comes down to that bumper cover, in order for that thing to be 100% past ADAS calibration, I'm going to need to use that radar formula. And that's a conversation I have to have with the customer up front, showing them, here's the 2 colors. This is why we have to do this. This is for your safety. We don't have the ability to adjust it. BMW or Nissan or Honda, they're working alongside your paint manufacturer, and this is the safest route for us to go with you, so all your functionality is intact. Next, please. So I don't want to go over this too much, but it's very important to understand, especially when it comes to estimatics, that you're watching very closely the differences in formulations, because there may be a price suffix may be the same, but you may have a price alteration. So keep that in mind when you're looking at radar versus non-radar, because the formulas can have significantly different prices, could be higher, could be lower. It's going to be color and manufacturer dependent. Next, Jordan. Okay, so Jeff also had a slide on this, and this is a pretty good visual. So this is BMW C5A, and when I type this color in the online formula lookup, I am immediately hit with 2 options: standard with a color reference tool number, and then the radar standard. So this is the first indicator to me, is there a finish tech, if, hey, maybe this information didn't get back to me, and I have this bumper cover for this BMW, and I type in C5A, and I'm like, hold on a second, they're giving me a radar compliant formula, and I do have a bumper cover back here. That is the red flag to me that I got to go get with my repair planner, my blueprinter, and say, hey, I'm getting this prompt on my computer. Is this vehicle equipped with ADAS in the area in which we're repairing? If so, then I know for a fact I got to use a radar compliant formula. And like Jeff had alluded to, there's going to be more and more paint procedures available through the OEM, specifically based around this type of stuff. So this is where the repair planning team and the refinish team got to be on the same page. Next, Jordan. So I wanted to show an example of what these look like. So what Jeff and I both have, we'll keep saying this probably indefinitely, is you cannot alter in any way, shape, or form the radar compliant formula. So once again, I go back to this C5A, and I can see it's, okay, frozen pure gray metallic. And I can see on the standard in the top versus the radar formula on the bottom, I have some significant differences. And in this paint line, the difference that jumps out to me immediately is in radar, I'm seeing something called M5, which is a blending clear. So that's indicating to me that BASF worked alongside BMW and said, okay, we got to break some of this tight flake up to get this radar permeation. So you can see some significant differences here. You're going to see a reduced amount of fine aluminums. You're going to see the addition of a clear binder. You're going to see a significant reduction in the black, all based around radar transmission. So this is why the old methodology of tinning it to get it closer, the moment I do that on a radar compliant formula, that radar compliant formula is no longer radar compliant. So I must, without question, follow this recipe for this color to make sure that when I plug into AirPro and they decide to get me recalibration, I have no problem getting through that because I use the right formulations. Next slide, please. And one final thing, and this is a relatively new, but it's definitely worth mentioning, particularly now since we are dealing with radar-based formula. So in the latest update to CCC, you can see here in bold yellow, a paint mixing system is considered a facility investment that enables the refinisher to mix desired color by combining paint toners. This formulation of color is not included in the estimated refinish allowance. So I think this is a very powerful statement, and it's also the right time because, once again, let's go back to our BMW bumper cover, deck lid, blend the quarter panels. Not only am I now have to, potentially do mill thickness measurements and reading up on the OEM procedures, but also there is a high probability I'm doing two completely separate mixes of an identical color for the same car. And now, because of this inquiry through the DEG that's been verified through CCC, I have the ability to bill for this additional mixing. And I think that's it for me, Jordan.
True. I have so many questions for you guys. And I don't know if I'm the one that should just harbor a few minutes for me here, but I'm going to say, there's probably a conversation with the paint technician and the blueprinter, and what does that conversation look like maybe from both of your perspectives. I think that it would be helpful to hear what's the practicality of, and Jeff, I apologize. I think I killed your video, but there you go, sir. You should be able to jump right back in. But I would love to hear both of your perspectives on what it means at the shop level to have this conversation and the importance of the difference. Daniel, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think that Jeff has a lot of power here coming from that OEM kind of liaison perspective, and mine's more, I would say field work. So our job is, as whether it be distribution or paint tech reps, we have to take as much training as possible from guys like Jeff, so that when we get into the shop floor, we can say, okay, look, this is the latest and greatest from BASF, and this is some of the stuff we have to be aware of. So in my personal opinion, that training that exists at the same time for refinish, blueprint, as well as estimatics. So the way that I try to handle it is we make sure that everybody in the front office that's doing estimatics or blueprinting has access to the paint manufacturers, whether it be online mixing or however they have it. They have access and they're trained on it, so that when a vehicle comes in, they can put that paint code in. And kind of the first step for them is, okay, I teach them, look for this radar prompt. Now we have an indicator that, okay, this code does fall within the parameters of potentially needing a radar formulation. Now it starts going down the additional OEM procedures, and we say, okay, the procedure gets attached to the RO, it follows it back. The paint technician knows, okay, yes, this is a radar compliant formula. We are doing a radar compliant necessarily repair, and now it's a relatively smooth transition.
So Jeff, I will lead in with that same question with, this has been on vehicles since 2008, I think is the number. So we're all acting like this might be a new problem, but it's an old new problem. What would you say to the same endeavor?
I mean, I think the thing there is we see it all the time. Technology is changing. And even if you look at just like your cell phone, what did your cell phone look like in 2008? What's it look like today? So you look at
BlackBerry.
the technology on those vehicles and the radar units on those vehicles. And back in 2008, the idea was, is there anything behind me? And I don't care if it's big or little or what it is, there's something there. And we've seen the OEMs change the types of radar units they're using. They've changed the frequency on those radar units because now they're trying to look at cross traffic. They're trying to look at what is behind them. Is it a car? Is it a person? Is it a child? And they're trying to take this towards autonomous vehicles. So it's got to get even more detailed and more understanding. So the information that's coming back is changing.
Mhm.
So as those sensors have changed, everything else around them changes. So that paint that didn't matter when I just needed to know, is there anything back there, to is there a child behind my car, is totally different. And that's really why this has become an issue just in the past in the past few months, really, or past few years here. And you're going to see more and more changes as we keep moving forward. And I think that's part of the reason too why some of the things that we asked, why aren't the OEMs doing something around X, Y, or Z? Because the technology is changing so fast. They're trying to keep up too.
That's fair. And I know George has probably insurance hat cost questions and procedure process questions on this. But my last question for that same subject is, if I repair this vehicle, and even if I do or do not follow the specs, will my calibration work or not work? Or is it only known when there's an issue? Like, will the calibration still be able to take place if that mill thickness, like you were talking about, is not correct?
Maybe. And that's the thing right now, because there are so many variables. Again, you could use the radar variant, but like Danny was talking about, if you put the radar variant on and we say 2 coats and you put on 3 or 4 coats, it may not work. If you use a standard, but you put on a really light 1 coat, it might work. But the real issue is, and that's why you're seeing some of these new tests come from the OEMs that check the signal strength, because you may be able to get it to pass a calibration, but is it truly passing at the signal strength it's supposed to or not? And that's why we're seeing some of the calibration techniques change as we're speaking. Because again, technology is changing so fast. We're all kind of learning about this together.
Yeah, there was our definite AirPro moment. George, what?
So real quick, thank you, Jordan. Real quick, gentlemen, I appreciate it. Great stuff. From an insurance perspective, what you were saying is this new formula may not match. So you have that, you want to have a discussion with the customer, but the only time you really don't see it, when you do see it, it's where the bumper meets the fender or the quarter panel. So I think insurance is prepared, at least in my opinion, to deal with, hey, wait a minute, this thing doesn't match. Well, that is radar paint. That's what's needed on your car. And in a way, I'm not sure this is a great comparison, but how many claims have I've been involved in where someone goes, they've had a frame rail replaced on a Mercedes and one side's welded and the other side shows evidence of rivets and adhesive. So wait a minute, that doesn't look the same as the other. Well, that's the repair procedure. That's what's got to be done to fix your car. My question is, can you blend the radar formula? And where I was going with, I'm anticipating an adjuster comes in and goes, okay, I'm okay with the different paint type. That's fine. But everything's up in front and everybody knows their eye is going to get caught between the bumper and the fender. Can you put the full radar on? And maybe as I say this, maybe it's just a dumb question, and then just blend. You can still blend and then continuous film clear the entire bumper. So is there some flexibility for the shop to keep from panel painting? I understand it may not be possible if the sensor is on the left front by the side. I mean, I understand that, but outside the radar, can they blend it?
Yes, and that's our recommendation always is when you use that radar variant, check the color and blend into the quarter panel or blend into the hood or the fender, whatever it is. because it's the same paint. It's just a different variant of the color.
Right.
So we're going to
Well,
tell
they've
you
got some
every time,
flexibility.
you should probably plan on blending and set it up that way, because yes, there are times when the color doesn't match, and whether you're using a radar variant or any color, our recommendation as a paint manufacturer is set it up to blend. Every color we have is considered a blendable match.
All right, perfect. Thanks. Daniel, the only other thing I had are we anticipating seeing, and I know you covered it, but are we anticipating seeing some additional line items for prepping the area around our radar that's different from the past? Do you anticipate some extra activity in that area? Doesn't matter what the amount is. It's just, do you see those line items?
George, I think for sure and I'm actually already seeing it. So I think you have a combination of, the additional, just the diagnostics on the refinish tech end of the blueprint end, where, hey, we do have to do these measurements. There is coupling gel involved. There's going to be some additional things that may happen. And yeah, there's no question that, like Jeff had said in that article, there's no such thing as just a small bumper repair anymore. And ironically, refinish techs, their job was just to paint cars. And now they're really going to be involved in the diagnosing of, can I paint this cover the way it is? So for sure, there's going to be additional, items on estimates going forward, as it's all around consumer safety.
Yeah,
Just to add to that too, there's also, we're talking now about protecting the backside of the bumper where the radar unit mounts. Because if you get overspray on the backside of the bumper, that can also impact the permittivity and it increases the film thickness or adds a pigment, making sure that the radar unit itself is covered so that the radar unit doesn't get overspray on it.
That's why this call is awesome. That is pretty cool stuff.
It's all those things like that you don't think about.
Right. Excellent.
Which I want to go back to something that you just said about the blend, which it's not controversial because it was a study that SCRS came out with that with all paint manufacturers, that blend is 142% of full refinish. So I do want to caution out there for those who have not seen that study, there are changes happening in our estimating guides about that. I do want to make sure people are aware, like, just because, to Jeff's point, you could blend or recommend blend, that doesn't mean it's less.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Jordan, because that's not where I was going. Where I was going,
I want to restate it because I think it's been such an important national conversation. For those who may or may not have heard it, I do highly recommend going and looking at that SCRS refinish study on blend versus full refinish. And even the variants of colors did change. And this clearly is another part of that process and procedure that needs to be considered.
And Jordan, just to add to you, CCC released basically the step-by-step instructions of how to set that in your estimate rules. It takes about 3 minutes. I did it with somebody the other day. Very simple.
I love that.
All I was saying is if when adjuster goes, hey, can we blend this? It isn't like, can we save money? That's not where I was going. Everything Jordan said.
Not you, George.
But I just want to know if it can, because I want to avoid, an extra phone call coming in the door because my bumper doesn't match my fender.
Yep.
And I just want to be able to, I just want to cover a good point, and the blending is a good thing. I appreciate that.
It's just so much to consider. And I think that this is just an additional layer that to you guys, and I know I have some more questions even here. So Daniel, refinish technicians, how can they proactively stay current on this? Or is it a culture of research and documentation?
It's definitely that. So the question you'd asked me in the beginning is like, how does that training go? From that's a combined force now. So your refinish department has got to be involved with the blueprinters, with the research team, so they kind of understand what this looks like. Now, to add a detail to that, refinish now is becoming a very complex, a very super A-level field because of just all the work involved. So the thing that refinish techs really have to be aware of is understanding we had a lot of bad habits just that existed in the old solvent days where, oh, I can put a couple extra coats on, or, you know, I can use this extra material. Refinish techs now have to understand the tech data sheets from the paint manufacturer at an incredibly high level. And what I mean by that is you would see variables. So let's say sealer might say anywhere from a 1.3 to a 1.5, and base coat might say a 1.3 to a 1.4. Clear coat could say 1.2 to a 1.5. So those were options to help get you through different types of jobs, different climates, things like that. But where we have to think now is, am I able to use that information to alter the film build to potentially repair something and save somebody a part? Because it's absolutely a viable option. So if I'm able to maintain film rates that still hit the paint manufacturer's requirement for warranty, but I'm also able to manipulate them to do repairs, you're at the highest level of paint tech you could ever possibly be. And that's truly by understanding yourself and understanding your tooling.
So can I ask an additional, I heard a used bumper brought up in your presentations. I also would like to just ask, so are there additional considerations for alternative parts, whether that's used aftermarket or OE? Like, are there different considerations while still understanding the manufacturer recommendations?
So I'll give my piece on this, and I'll ask Jeff to chime in. But as far as I know, because I'm not the blueprint estimator expert, but as far as I know, there's no OEM stating that they can allow an ADAS pass on a radar bumper cover that's not an OEM bumper cover. Jeff, do you have any different thought on that?
No, I mean, if you look at the OEM repair procedures, they're always going to tell you to use an OEM bumper. And the thing is, when you start looking at these other parts that have paint on them already, have they been repaired? You know, how much paint do they have on them? What type of paint do they have on them? What color is the paint on them? You know, again, we don't have that starting point to tell us, is this coating on there radar compatible? And if so, what can or cannot go over it? You know, is the coating you put on it now going to be still radar compatible with whatever's under it? And there are a lot of questions there that we can't answer. So we always go back to the OEM repair procedures. And the other question that comes up is, well, I'll just sand that off. I'll grind it down, I'll get to bare plastic. The problem you run into there is just like when we talk about blending, we want a consistent finish over that radar unit. When you sand something down, you now put sand grooves and marks into that, and you don't have a consistent finish on the top of that bumper, which can lead to issues with the radar unit. When it comes out, it's reflecting off that radar in different directions. So you can't sand it back down to the bare plastic and say, okay, I'm starting it from just like a new bumper.
Sure. Okay, I've got a follow up for that. From an attendee. Any other considerations for PPF/ceramic coating in areas that have been repaired, not repaired? Ceramic coating is really popular in my area. I know that.
And those ceramic coatings bring in a whole different aspect. And there's so many variables because there's so many different types. Some of those you can almost wash off. Some of those you can't even grind off.
Yep.
And it really goes back to going back to the manufacturer to find out what you have to do to prep that first of all so you can put paint over it. And again, because we don't manufacture those, we have to go back to those manufacturers and ask questions. And there are hundreds of them out there. So for me to give you an answer is pretty much impossible without knowing specifically what you're talking about and the details behind it and getting their technical information. Sure. But typically a clear product like that won't impact the radar transmission, but it might.
Sure. Well, and I know even just from the one manufacturer that my vehicle, I had 3 options, and it was literally how many coats of this do you want on your vehicle? We do have one more question. We have 5 minutes left. Daniel, do you want to respond to what we just talked about? And then maybe The other question here, we have same thing about vinyl wraps. These are all coming in as I'm talking.
Matte colors.
Colored vinyl wraps, matte clears, and then also one about masking procedures. So you guys could bounce off each other if you'd like, but there's a lot of questions coming in about other alternative finishes here.
I'm with Jeff on the clear vinyl. You know, do I think it's potential to be okay? Yes, but once again, I really think no matter what the OEM is, you got to look up that procedure, because they may, even though it's clear, they may say maximum allowable film thickness 10 mils. And some of these PPFs are on their own 10 mils. So you could pretty much be confident that you're probably going to have an interruption there. As far as the colored vinyl, personal perspective, I would say 100% no, because there's absolutely no ability for that radar transmission to make it through a wrap it's completely different color than the vehicle.
Great point.
Yeah, and I would agree with Daniel. You know, when we look at the way we test colors for radar transmission for the permittivity, there's a process they go through where we have to have the bumper material and measure how much material is on and know what pigments are in it and so forth. And then it goes out to testing at the OEM where they actually test their radar. They measure the transmission signal and the loss of that signal when it goes out and back. And if you're talking about vinyl or anything like that, you've got to do the same type of testing. And without that testing, I can't really give you an answer whether it's going to work or not. Your question on matte finishes, a matte finish would be the same as a gloss finish. So it's going to have the same type of an impact. And when we measure that, whether you're going with a gloss or a matte, it's going to be fine as long as you're following the paint manufacturer recommendations for how thick that goes on.
Let's not forget that it's the consumer's car, right?
Right.
People do a lot of weird things to their car and they like it.
Hey, we just came from SEMA, George.
Yeah, well, what I was getting at is you might run across an 84%er that says, look, I turned that damn thing off anyway. So I don't care that I covered it with a wrap. So, you know, and it's their car. They can do whatever they want.
Right.
But man, you know, that's, of course, we have that with any customization, but I would be at an interesting claims issue.
Yeah.
You know,
SEMA is definitely addressing this in their ADAS and calibration in concert with a lot of our leading collision repair professionals. They've pulled a lot of our notables from our industry into their discussions about how the aftermarket is affected by these, because it's so hard to wrap their brain around. But they still want everybody, especially in that world, wants the ability to customize their vehicle.
Oh,
so
yeah. What is the gentleman's name from SEMA that does the testing? Excellent.
Oh, Mike Mueller.
Right.
Mueller. Yes.
Right. So
that gentleman.
I think SEMA has taken a heck of a step toward helping those that want them out. That's pretty good.
Yeah. There's a whole industry.
All I had, Jordan, because I know we're coming up at the top.
We are. And we have a closing statement, I believe, still on the forefront here. So
Excellent.
yeah, you guys did a fantastic job. It was excellent content. I think it was very on point for the AirPro family as well. You both are knowledgeable and spoke from amazing perspectives. And I think that anybody who was here, and if they missed it, they need to watch it. But I think it was fantastic. You guys did awesome.
We want to thank everybody for the speakers, our hosts, and our audience. Just want to remind you to mark your calendar for January 31st. That will be our next Tech Talk. And if you, we'll be posting it on YouTube and on the AirPro website, probably within the next 48 hours. I'll send everyone who's attended and registered an email. Watch for our announcements, and if you have any questions, you have my email address there. Let me know your thoughts. If you have any suggestions for further and future Tech Talk 360s, please send those too. Again, thank you all.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a happy Thanksgiving.
You too. Thanks, Fred.